Hi. So the topic that we will be discussing today is chapter 9 and it relates to inventory management. Now, this is the last chapter for our course, and it's a relatively long chapter. So um, it is a fairly important topic in operations management as well. You might remember when we started our course, I said that there are three main topics of interest in operations management. One of them, the first one was process analysis. We did discuss process analysis in detail. Our entire second part of the course and the second midterm was related to process analysis. The second part is, or the second important topic in operations management is supply chain management. M-A-N-A-G-E-M-E-N-T. Now, this is something that we went through before this chapter. I would have loved to discuss this in detail. However, under the circumstances, I had to limit our discussion on supply chains. However, there is a 400 level course that goes into the detail of supply chain management. If this topic or the previous chapters that we went through on supply chain interest you, then I highly recommend that you take that 400 level course. So the third important topic in operations management is what we will be starting today, which is inventory management. So without further delay, let's move on and see what are the different topics what are the different parts of this chapter that we'll be going through. Let me clear all drawings. Okay, so basically there are 4 learning objectives from this chapter. We will first discuss what is inventory management. Then we will move on to the second topic or the second learning objective, which is elements of inventory management. Then we will discuss economic order quantity models. And finally, we will conclude this chapter by having a comprehensive discussion on continuous review systems. So as I said, it's a long chapter. So what I will do is I will create 3 separate video sessions. And those sessions will discuss these things. So this is the first part of a series of 3 sessions. So this is our part 1, which we will be discussing today. And then I will create a separate lecture, which will be part 2. And then I'll create a third lecture, which will be part 3. So the second lecture will only discuss the EOQ model, and the third lecture will discuss the continuous review system. Now, I must add at this point in time, I'm not sure whether part 3 should be a part of the final exam. I'm still thinking about it. Let me create a lecture on it first, and then we can discuss this in detail in our weekly review session. As of now, I am inclined to not include this in the final exam. It's a relatively complex topic as compared to the other topics in this chapter. So yeah, let me circle back to this when we meet for our weekly review session on Wednesday. So having said that, let's move on and let's start our basic discussion on what exactly is inventory management and what are the different elements of inventory management. So what exactly is inventory? Now, this is a relatively straightforward question. Inventory generally relates to the items that we have stored, right? They could be in different forms. So it could be stored in the form of raw materials. It could be stored in the form of work in process items, or it could be stored as finished products as well. But generally, whenever we store items, they are called inventory, and inventory exists everywhere. So generally, suppliers have inventory, then suppliers store inventory in their warehouses. Then if there's a manufacturing plant, there is inventory over there. There's inventory in distribution centers. And generally, there is inventory in the retail stores as well. So inventory exists everywhere in a supply chain. And essentially, supply chain management and inventory management, they go hand in hand, because a supply chain cannot function without inventory and vice versa. And as you have clearly seen by the things that are happening around us, that when supply chains fail, it's predominantly because inventory management has not been done well. So basically, if I relate inventory management to what we were discussing earlier regarding supply chain management, we said that supply chain management is about meeting the demand with supply, right? So what do we mean by meeting demand with supply? Basically, it means that when there's a demand for an item, you have two options. You either start making the item and deliver it, or the other option, which exists in 99.9% of the cases, is that you have stored inventory of those items and you meet the demand by supplying the items from the inventory. And that is why this topic of inventory management becomes important. Right? So, generally, there are, so generally when we talk about inventory management, the fundamental question that we need to answer is how much inventory should we carry? That is the fundamental question that we will try to answer in this entire chapter. How much inventory should we have? Now, there are pressures for more inventory, but at the same time, there are pressures within an organization for less inventory as well. So what do I mean by those pressures? Let me give you a very simple example. So let's say the average demand, and again, the word is average. So I'm going to denote it by D dash. D means a demand and the dash on the top means an average. Let's say the average demand for a product is 100 units per day. And let's say the demand graph, so let's say this is time, let's say this is demand, and for a product is something like this. So a random graph, basically. I'm just trying to draw a random graph. And let's say let me change the number. Change the color. So let's say the average of this is 100. So let's say the average demand for a product is 100. As you can see, the demand sometimes goes up, sometimes goes down. The average demand is 100. The maximum is, let's say, 120, and the minimum is 80. So let's say these are this is the demand for a product. Now my question is, if your average demand is 100 units per day, how many units would you want to store, right? So actually I'll give you a little bit of time to think about it. I'll repeat the question. If the average demand for a product is 100, the maximum demand is 120, and the minimum demand is 80, and the demand is pretty random, but always stays between 80 and 120. My question is, how many units will you store? So basically, how much inventory would you carry? That's my question. So one option is 100. We just carry 100. And then what would happen if the demand goes up beyond 100? We will just lose those customers. The other option is 120, which is the maximum. Third option could be a number which is even higher than 120. So what if the demand goes beyond 120, right? It has not gone beyond 120 in recent times, but what if it does? And the fourth option is any number between, let's say, 100 to 120. And the fifth option is a number which is less than 100. Now, if I give you these options, the number that you will pick depends on several factors. And we will discuss those factors towards the end of this chapter. But most people would agree that that number has to be higher than this number, right? So in other words, this is not a good option. Maybe for some people, this is a good option as well. But if you do that, you will end up with a lot of inventory, right? This also, I mean, some people would be fine with this as well, but under extreme circumstances, you would want to do this, because this, in my opinion, is if you have a lot of pressure for less inventory, then maybe you would want to do that. Otherwise, most firms would want to have a number between, let's say, 100 and some number between 100 to 120, right? Most firms would want to have something like this, not higher than 120, not 120, a number between 100 to 120. Now the question is, what determines how many units should we exactly carry? And that is our topic for this entire chapter. In this entire chapter, we would be asking ourselves, what is the optimum number of units that we should carry that minimizes our overall total cost? Because at the end of the day, this becomes a cost discussion. If you have too much inventory, you will have, you obviously will have higher costs. If you have too less inventory, then you will suffer because you would not be able to meet customer demand. So we have to maintain a balance. Now, coming back to what we have on the slide, there are always pressures for more inventory. And predominantly that pressure comes from customer service. So salespeople or marketing people want as much inventory as possible, because a typical salesperson would say that, you know what, the demand has not gone beyond 120, but what if the demand goes beyond 120? I don't want to lose those customers as well. So predominantly firms want to have more inventory for customer service perspective. From a customer service perspective, or they want to have more inventory because they want to serve customers. Generally, you would want to have more inventory if your ordering cost is very, very high. So basically, if the cost of placing an order is very, very high, you don't want to place a lot of orders. So you will place one big, huge order, and that would result in more inventory. And then there are some other reasons as well, but these two are the major reasons. At the same time, while there are pressures for more inventory, there are also reasons to have less inventory as well. And the biggest one that contributes to the pressure for less inventory is inventory holding cost. The more inventory you have, the higher will be your holding cost. What exactly is holding cost? We will discuss it in the next few slides. The other reason is cost of capital as well. So the more inventory you'll have, the more you'll have to invest in buying that inventory, which means that you cannot take advantage of, you actually lose the opportunity cost of using that capital to buy something else. So for example, if I have $200 and I just bought inventory from those $200, I have lost the opportunity to use that $200 to do something else in my business. That is essentially what the cost of capital is. So these two are the fundamental reasons that push firms to have less inventory. And our main task or our main objective in this chapter is to find a balance between these two pressures, right? That is our main task. How do we balance out the pressure for more inventory against the pressure for less inventory? And that is in essence what we call inventory management. Okay, so with that said, let's move on to our next slide. I'm first going to clear all the drawings. So let's, now that we have discussed what exactly do we mean by inventory management, or why do we need inventory management, let's move on to types of inventories. Now, in terms of types of inventories, just a little bit. So in terms of types of inventories, I will first go through the accounting inventories. So generally, when you open up a balance sheet of any organization, you find these three types of inventories, which are raw materials, work in process, finished goods. So raw materials are the inventories that are needed for the production of services or goods. They are generally at the beginning of your process. That's why they're called raw materials. Work in process is anything that is not raw material and that is not a finished product. So any item that you have started work on, but it's not yet ready to be sold, it's work in process. And finished goods are obviously the items that are ready to be sold. So those are the three basic type of accounting inventories. And again, the focus or the emphasis is on the word accounting inventories. But that is not how we categorize inventories in operations management. In operations management, we actually look at how the inventory is created, and that is what that is how we look at inventories in operations management. There are 4 forms of inventories in operations management, and those 4 forms are cycle inventory, pipeline inventory, safety stock inventory, and anticipation inventory. Now, before I go into the definition of these 4 types, I first want to define a lot size. So, excuse me. A lot size is the quantity of an item that a firm generally buys from supplier. So for example, if you always order a quantity of 100 from a supplier, your lot size is 100. It's the typical or the usual order size. That is what a lot size is. So now that we have defined lot size, I'll circle back to our 4 forms of inventories. So in this course, we will not discuss anticipation inventory. Safety stock inventory will come towards the end of this chapter. And again, as I said in the beginning of this session, I'm still debating whether we should include this in our final exam or not. I mean, my inclination is that we should not include this. But again, we will discuss this when we meet this Wednesday. But to define safety stock, what exactly is safety stock? As the name indicates, safety stock is the surplus or the extra inventory that a company holds to protect against any uncertain changes in demand, right? So basically, you do expect that there will be some changes in demand. You do take care of it by having some extra inventory, but safety stock is beyond the expected changes in demand. So that is what safety stock is. Okay, now cycle inventory, as the name indicates, is the average amount of inventory in a cycle. It varies with lot size. What do we mean by it? I'm going to explain it on the very next slide. And then we have pipeline inventory. Pipeline inventory is the inventory that is created when an order of an item is issued, but we have not yet received that item. Now, what exactly is, I will explain pipeline inventory in detail as well after I have explained cycle inventory. So let's start with cycle inventory. Now, as I said, cycle inventory, if I have to define it, is the average amount of inventory in a cycle. The theoretical definition of it is it's a portion of total inventory that varies directly with lot size. Now, what do we mean by it? So for example, and this is an example that we will keep on using for our EOQ model as well. So let's say, for example, the lot size, which is represented by Q in this book, in your book, is 350 units for an item. So what do we mean by a lot size of 350? Basically, what this means is that whenever you as an organization buy this item, you always buy them in quantities of 350. So for example, if we have this item, let's just call this item XYZ. So let's say we are buying this item from supplier. whenever we buy this item from a supplier, we order in quantities of 350 units. That is essentially what lot size means. Now, let's say we always place an order of 350, and let's also assume that our demand for this product is 50 units per day. Now, this is not the average demand. Let's just assume that demand is fixed at 50 units per day. So every day we will be selling 50 units, period. No 49, no 51, exactly 50 units. And excuse me. So let's say this is the hypothetical scenario. Demand is 50 units per day. You start with 350 units, right? So I'm going to draw it over here. Let's say this is time in days. And days. And this, let's say this axis is quantity, right? And I'm going to change the color. Let's see. Okay. So as I said, you start with 350, right? So we start with 350 units. Now, the question is, if you start with 350 units and the demand is exactly 50 units per day, how many days will it take you to sell these 350 units? And the answer is 7 days. Now, how do we know this? You sell 50 units every day. So in 7 days, 7 times 50 will be 350 units. So you'll keep on selling. So on day one, you will, day zero, you'll start with 350. At the end of day one, you will be left with 300. At the end of day two, you will be left with 250. And every day you will keep on selling 50 units till you reach 0 units. And you will reach 0 units in 7 days. Now, ideally on 7th day, you should have received another order of 350. And then you will start selling those units in the second cycle. And you will consume those units in another 7 days. So on day 14, you will again reach 0 inventory. Now, this triangle is called an inventory cycle. And the average inventory in this cycle is starting plus ending divided by 2. So the starting inventory was Q, which in this example was 350. The ending inventory was 0, and we just take the average. So that comes out to be 175 units. Now this 175 units is called cycle inventory. So the cycle inventory is the average amount of inventory we hold in a cycle. The formula for cycle inventory is Q by 2. So we started with a lot size of 350. And 350 divided by 2 is 175. That is our cycle inventory for this example. Right? So that's our that's how you calculate cycle inventory. And that's the basic concept of cycle inventory. It's the average inventory in a cycle. Now, the next topic that the next form of inventory that we'll go through is pipeline inventory. So for pipeline inventory, I'm going to stick with the same example. I'm just going to erase a few of the things. So I'm going to erase this. Okay, so the example essentially remains the same, which is that the demand is 50 units per day. We start with the order quantity of 350 units, which is 350. We consume those 350 in 7 days. On 7th day, we should ideally have 350 more units, and we will consume them in the next 7 days. Now, the additional information that we now need to discuss pipeline inventory is lead time. Lead time. So I'm just going to write lead time of 2 days. Now, what exactly do we mean by lead time? Lead time is if I place an order today how many days will it take us to receive the order? And in this example, we are assuming that lead time is 2 days. So I'll again repeat what lead time is. Lead time is, if I place the order today, how many days will it take us to receive our order? For example, in usual circumstances, the lead time for a typical Amazon delivery is 2 days. Similarly, if you're ordering items from China, on average, the lead time is 14 days if it's coming through regular mail. Now, what does that mean? If I place an order today, I will most likely receive that order in 14 days. So the lead time is 14 days in that example. Now, in this example, we are using a lead time of 2 days. Now, my question is, excuse me, if your lead time is 2 days, and in this example, you don't want to end up with a stock out on day 7, when should you place your first order? So I'll repeat the question again. If you don't want to end up with a stock out on day 7, in this example, when should you place your first order? And if your answer is, let me change the color first. I'm just going to use green now. And if your answer is that we should place our order on day 5, then that answer is correct. Because the lead time is 2 days and the difference between day 5 and day 7 is 2 days. So if you place your order on day 5, you will receive that order on day 7. And then it means that on day 7, you will have 350 more units. So let me explain this one more time. Now, we start with 350 units. We keep on using 350. We keep on taking items from those 350 units at a rate of 50 units per day, which means on day 7, we will reach 0. Now, when we will reach 0, ideally, we should receive another order of 350 on that day. Now, if the lead time is 2 days, the first order should be placed on day 5, because on day 5, when we place the order, that order will reach us on day 7, right? Now, on day 5, when we place the order, we have 100 units left in stock, because we will use those 100 units for the next 2 days, right? We will use the first 50 on day 6, and by end of day 6, we will be left with 50, and those 50 will be used on the last day. Now, this figure of 100 units is called pipeline inventory. Now, pipeline inventory is that form of inventory that is created when an order for an item is issued but not yet received. So when we created an order for this product, at that time we had 100 units in stock, and those 100 units are called pipeline inventory. These inventories exist because a firm must commit to enough inventory to cover the lead time for an order. What does that mean? The reason we have these 100 units in stock is because we have still 2 more days left before we get our new order. And we need to have enough stock with us so that we can live these 2 days without incurring a stock out. And that is in essence what we call pipeline inventory. Now, the formula for pipeline inventory is relatively straightforward. It's the average demand times the lead time. Now, average demand times lead time. The average demand in this case was 50 units per day. The lead time was 2 days, so 50 times 2 is 100 units. And that is our pipeline inventory. So that is the second form of inventory. The third form of inventory is safety stock, and the fourth form of inventory is anticipation. As I said, and let me go back to those slides, and let me erase all these drawings. As I said, we will not discuss anticipation inventory in this course. And safety stock inventory is part 3 of this chapter. Now, what we will do now is, now that we have discussed cycle inventory and pipeline inventory, we will start our conversation on EOQ, which is part 2 of our lecture. So I'm going to stop the lecture here, and I'm going to make a second lecture, and that second lecture will be on EOQ, which will use the concepts that we have just discussed, cycle inventory and pipeline inventory.